Hey everybody, in this video we're going to be showing you a fantastic method of painting a Space Marine Terminator Librarian for Warhammer 40,000 by Games Workshop. Now, like many higher ranking individuals in Space Marine chapters, Librarians have a particular colour that their armour is always painted. In this case it's a dark blue, so we're going to be showing you how to do this, and it doesn't matter what chapter you're going for, it's always going to be this colour. However, some of the heraldry is picked out in your chapter of choice, and for example here what we're going to go for is Imperial Fists, but when we get to that part you can certainly substitute the colours in for your chapter of choice. Now this miniature is really fun, it's got loads of cool details on it, including some great glows. We're going to do those later on, so we hope you enjoy it. Let's get to it. A Space Marine Librarian is almost entirely covered with dark blue armour, so what we need to do is start out by base coating that. This means we need to choose an undercoat colour that's going to work well for that. So in this case I find going for a medium to dark grey is ideal. So I've gone for standard grey from the Colour Forge here, but any colour sort of like this will be absolutely fine. So what we need to do is start by base coating that dark blue, and the perfect colour for this is some Kantor blue, so a nice deep rich blue this one. And what we want to do is just quickly paint it all over. So for that reason what I've got here is my good old rough base coating brush, my medium base brush here, that's definitely seen better days, but for the method of application here it's absolutely perfect. What we need to do is just get some of this onto our palette as usual, and then making sure it's thinned down with that touch of water, just being careful with the brush like this because it absorbs a lot of water very quickly. So you can see I'm just getting rid of some of the excess just there before mixing it in, just to make sure I don't thin the paint down too much. Now with that prepared, what we want to do is start applying it all over the miniature. So get it nicely mixed together. We're going to use the palette to adjust the amount that's on the brush so we're not going to overdo it, and then we're ready to start applying it. And for this first step, all we've got to do is paint all the armour plates, not worrying about any of the details. So don't worry if you catch anything else. So for example, there's purity seals there. We'll come back to those later on. But it is important that we get all the plates and also make sure we work it into all the nooks and crannies as we go along. Now this miniature does have a lot of runes on its armour, so do take care around those, making sure the paint doesn't clog them up. Just make sure as you're going past them, you just keep an eye on it to make sure the paint's settling evenly and not really building up in those recesses too much. Once you've finished applying that blue all across the armour plating, the next thing to do is begin the process of base coating a number of colours on there that can all share the same colour wash. And initially we're looking for a black wash. So what we want to do now is look for the black details in the miniature, and here use an off black colour that when we apply that black wash over is going to gain some depth and definition in it. So what I've got is some Death Reaper here, and to apply it I've gone for a size 0 brush from Art's Opus, so a medium to small brush. That's because these features that we're going to look for now are different shapes and sizes, but generally it's the joints that I'm really keen on here because these can be quite difficult to get to, and having a smaller brush like this will really help out with it. Now on the palette, just make sure your brush isn't overloaded, so as ever thin it down with a touch of water and then just twist away the excess paint so you've got a good point there on your bristles. You can see it doesn't look like there's a massive amount of paint on the brush there, but that's because we now need to look for these joints, and some of them are relatively easy to get to, such as this one right here on the arm, but some of them are quite tricky to get to, such as the one here on the back of the leg. Now when you're going for areas like this, if you do catch some of that blue armour, don't worry about it, just let the black dry, then neaten it with the blue once you're done. Now in addition there are some other bits in black that we need to look out for, and that includes the casing of his storm bolter just back here, so we want to paint all of this at this stage. Also a little bit of black on the axe, and that's this part just here underneath the head, so be sure to get that. Now one other thing to paint black is a joint that later on is going to have a blue glow on it, and that's the one on the hand just here, so don't worry about the glow for the time being, just carry on with this joint, painting it like all the rest, making sure it's black at this stage. Once you've finished picking out all that black detail, the next thing to do is to start looking for some other colours that can all share that black wash, and we've got 3 to do here. We'll start out with the silver, and for this I'm going to use some Surcoat silver, and then once that's done we can pick out the shells and the storm bolter. For this we're going to go for a bronze, so here I'm going to use some Spartan Bronze. Now finally we've got some red cables in the miniature, and here we need a darker red, so for this we'll use some Khorne Red. But first of all what we need is that silver, so we've got some Surcoat silver here on the palette, and I'm using the same brush once again, so it's that size 0. Again, feel free to change as you need to depending on the size of feature that you're doing, but the silver details are generally scattered around the miniature, and so we've just got to look around for them. To begin with, there's quite a few that appear on the storm bolter, and this will be things such as the barrels on the gun just around here, so we want to very carefully block this in, being really neat and tidy as we get close to that black and the blue. So so areas such as just there. Also on the back of the armour there are these vents, so we want to make sure we get these at this stage, so all around here. And there's also some silver on the axe, and we're looking at areas such as around here. Now in addition, on the axe, if you want to paint the blade silver, now's the time to do it. In our case, we're going to go for an energy effect later on, so I'm not going to paint it at this stage, but if you want to be silver, then go for it at this stage. The silver's now all base coated, so we can move on to a little bit of bronze, because you can see the bolter shells are visible on the side of the magazine just here. So what we want to do at this stage, just go in and pick them out with a bronze. I'm using some Spartan Bronze in this case, and it's just a matter of just being as neat as possible whilst painting it in amongst all of this silver. And then finally we can move on to Khorne Red, and for this, first of all, we're looking for the smooth cables that run alongside the ridged ones. So for example, this one just here, but in addition, we want to base coat his axe haft at this point, so we're looking at this region around here. With that, we've now finished applying all those base coats that can take advantage of the black wash, so it's time to apply that black wash. And here you have a choice, because what you can do is carefully paint it into all the recesses, or you can wash it all over the miniature and then later on do some layering to clean it up. Now I'm going to do the latter of those two, because I find with Terminator armour it's generally just a little bit quicker. But also with this miniature, what we have is a load of those recessed runic designs on there. And later on we are going to paint them with a glowing effect, but if we have some black wash in them now, then what it will do is clearly mark them out, so when we get to the stage of painting the glow, it's going to make it easier to pick them out and base coat them. So I'm going to be using some Oblivion black wash here, and because I'm painting it all over, we want quite a large brush. So what I'm using is a medium shade brush from Citadel. What we need to do is just load up a generous amount on the brush and then start applying it all over the miniature. So pick a starting point, so for example on the leg down here, to start applying it and pushing it around. Now we need to be careful to make sure it doesn't build up too much, in particular on those runes, because we don't want to clog them up and start obscuring that detail. So you can see I put some on, and I'm just pushing it around as far as it will go. And we're looking for the balance of having that recessed shading, but also making sure it's just not too much. So just keep it moving around until you're getting to around about the strength of what I've achieved there on the front of that leg. And we're looking for that all across the miniature. So all these colours we painted, want to make sure we wash it all over them at this stage. And once you've done so, give it around about 45 minutes to dry. The black wash is now completely dry, and so we can begin the next sequence, which is going to be a number more base coats on the miniature that this time can share a brown wash. And what we're looking at first of all is the leather, and for this we're going to use some Mornfang brown. Now to apply it, I've gone back to my size 0 brush here, but any small to medium brush like this will do absolutely fine. And what we want to do is, as ever, get some of this ready on the palette and then start looking for the leather details, which are, first of all, on his back, there's this satchel here for a book. I want to base coat all of this, including the front of it down here, all this cover around here as well. And in addition, what we've got is a little leather strap that's holding up his pendant just here, hanging from his wrist. So we want to base coat this at this stage as well. With that, we've now got the leather details base coated, and so it's time to pick out some other smaller details that are all going to share that brown wash. And of course, it wouldn't be a Space Marine without purity seals, so we need to start there. For this, what we're going to use is some sword hilt Burgundy first of all for the wax, and then for the parchment, we'll use some Griffon Claw. And once that's done, it's then time to pick out the stone crux terminata symbol. And for this, we're going to use some Dungeon Stone Grey. But first of all, it's that sword hilt Burgundy, and to apply this one, I'm just going to go for the same brush, so still that size 0 here. And with it, we just need to get a small amount of this ready, and then it's time to start looking for all of these wax seals. And there are quite a few of them on the miniature. Essentially, it's things such as these ones here on the leg, and all we need to do at this stage is just block these in entirely. Once you've found all those wax seals, we're then ready to move on to some Griffon Claw, and with this, we need to pick out all of the parchment. And then finally we're ready to move on to a dark grey, and here I'm using some Dungeon Stone Grey, and this is to pick out the crux terminata symbol around here. With those colours applied, we're now ready to move on to adding that brown wash onto the miniature, and this is going to be over all these new colours that we've added since we did that black wash. So for that reason, we just need to be careful on how we apply it. Now the colour I'm going to be using is Battle Mud Wash, and for the brush, I'm actually going to use that size 0 once again, and this is purely so we can control it and just keep it on these new colours. Now on the palette, you just need to make sure your brush isn't overloaded with it so it doesn't run out of control, and then it's time to start looking for these features. What I like to do with this is look for the middle of the area first of all. So for example, this little bag that we've got just here, here, start in the middle and just apply a good amount of that wash on there like that, and then it's easy to start manipulating it and moving it up to the edges where we meet with the details. So for example, around here. Now the brown wash is dry, it's time to move on to the next area of colour, which is going to be actually the yellow details, for which we're going to use a sepia wash to keep that strength of the yellow. And this yellow is quite a bright one, so what we need to do is set up to it first of all with a darker yellow, for which we can then layer over the top with a brighter yellow to get a nice vibrant colour. So what we're going to use here is some dark sun yellow to get things going, and to apply it I'm going to be sticking to my size 0 brush. But with this one we need to be careful, because essentially what we're looking at is all those cables with that rib texture on it. Now because of that texture, it's very easy for it to catch the bristles and start making them flick out different directions and catching surrounding areas. So throughout this process, just take your time, be as neat as you can, and be aware of that. So these are the sort of things we're looking at here, and you can see all that texture running across them, and you can see how it makes it a little bit tricky to block them in to make sure the paint gets across them evenly. So just take your time, gently working that paint into it and follow them all the way around, being particularly careful of the one that's on his head, hidden away just up here underneath the psychic hood. And here we have the miniature with those yellow pipes now base coated, including that one hidden away underneath the psychic hood on top of his head just there. And with that done, what we're now going to do is apply a bright yellow over the top. And you might be wondering then why we put down that initial yellow, and the reason is because yellow is generally quite a weak colour compared to other paints. So what we've done now is set up a foundation with a yellow, meaning that when we paint a brighter yellow over the top, some of the yellow beneath will show through, resulting in a more vibrant colour. So that's why I've gone to this effort here. So what we need is a brighter yellow, and what I'm going to use for this is Skulker Yellow. And to apply it, we want the same brush, because essentially, even though we're sort of layering this, it's a very heavy layer. It's almost like a base coat directly over the top of what we've just done. So it's the same brush and the same method that we need to use to apply it. Again, making sure the paint's nicely thinned down so that we have that control over it. And then we can start painting it onto these cables. And just like before, we do need to be careful about that texture causing the brush to flick around a little bit, but really it's just a matter of painting this colour directly over the top so we get that really nice bright yellow. And with that, you can see we now got that nice, bright, vibrant yellow. And because we don't want to lose that vibrancy, that's why we kept it separate from the part where we applied the brown wash. Because whilst you certainly could use a brown wash to shade these pipes, instead we're going to use a sepia one to keep that yellow tint. And so here I'm going to be using some Archaic sepia wash. And to apply it, I'm going for that size 0 brush once again. So keep it under control and just on these pipes. All you need to do is load up on your brush, making sure that you're not overdoing it, and then paint it directly over these pipes so it settles in that recessed texture and really brings it out. Now the wash is dry on that yellow, we can move on to the next area of colour, and what we're actually going to do is paint in two to begin with here, with 2 base coats, then take one of them further, because what we're now looking for are colours that can use a chestnut wash, so a flesh wash essentially. Now for this we can use the gold, which will give it a nice rich vibrancy, and also for the flesh as well. And what we're going to do is base coat those, wash them, then move on to completion with that skin. And the reason why we'll do the skin there is because it's quite hidden away. So we'll complete that and start working outwards from there. So going back to the start of all that, what we need to do is start out by base coating that gold, and here we're going to use some Dragon's Gold. Now once that's done, we can then base coat the flesh, and in this case what we're going to use is some Barbarian Brawn. But first of all we need some Dragon's Gold, and to apply it I'm going for my size 0 brush once again, but feel free to change as you want to throughout this stage, because basically here we're looking for all the decorations that appear around the armour. So the gold features are all sorts of shapes and sizes, but generally it's going to be things like skulls and things like that. So for example, we've got this skull just here on the knee, we're looking for features such as this, and we just want to neatly base coat them at this stage. And once you've found all that gold, it's time to base coat the flesh. And here I'm starting out with some Barbarian Brawn, and I've actually switched to a small brush now. I've got a size 00 here because this is a little bit tricky to get to. So definitely take your time as you're base coating the skin, just being really careful not to catch that blue armour surrounding it. And there we go, the skin's now base coated, so it's time to move on to that chestnut coloured wash. And for this I'm going to be using some flesh wash, and to apply it I'm actually going to start out with my size 00 brush once again, because I'm going to start on the face. But it's a good idea to have a slightly larger brush on hand for all the gold detail, because now we're looking to cover both of those with this colour wash. So all we need is to get some of this on the brush, then it's time to start looking for these features. So as I said, I'm going to start out with the skin. So I want to carefully go in here and just wash it over the flesh so it runs into those recesses and gives us that definition. But once this is done, we also need to wash it over the gold detail as well. And there we are, that wash is now dry too, so it's time to move on to the next phase, which is going to be going into the face there to complete that skin. And so what we now need is to layer it, and for this I'm going to use some Dwarven Skin. And what we're aiming to do here is to apply this colour to the flesh, but to avoid recessed areas to retain that definition that we just got. So to do this, you'll definitely want to go for a small brush. So once again, I'm using my size 00 here, and what we need to do is just get a small amount of this ready. The key thing here is to make sure it's firstly nice and thin, but secondly that you don't have loads of this on the brush so that you retain that nice point on there. Because with this we'll need that accuracy. So once that's prepared, we can start going in to do this, and we're aiming then for those raised up areas and avoiding the recesses. So what I tend to do is start on the nose, where we just want to gently go in and just start working our way down the bridge of it, so picking it out just there and then flaring out at the bottom around the nostrils. And then we can go a little bit further up to the brow, which is a bit hidden under the psychic hood. So take your time as you're doing this part, just need to get those bits just there. Then following it down the side, down towards the cheek. And again, you can see I'm just being careful to avoid that recess of the eye, just making sure we get the lower eyelid, going down the side of the face just there, and then getting the side of the nose. So you see all the while, I'm just looking for those recesses and just carefully avoiding them whilst just concentrating on the raised up flat areas. I've finished that layer now, and you can see the skin starting to stand out, and it will look a little bit strange at this point, and that's because you can see he's got a moustache, which at this point I've not painted. So everything's going to look a little bit odd at the moment until we actually paint in that moustache. But at this stage, what we can now do is move on to highlighting it, and we'll come back to the moustache later on. So what we now need is a light skin colour. I'm going to use some Elven Skin for this one, and to apply it I'm sticking to that fine brush, so still my size 00 here. And with this one, we're now looking to pick out the sharper features. So once we've got that paint thinned and ready, we can start looking for them. And so once again, we'll start out with the nose, where we're looking to pick out the bridge of it once again. In this case, it's just going to be a line down the very middle of it. So just there, again, just a little line again at the bottom where we go around the nostrils. So there, like that. We've also got the brow to do, so we want to go across the top of his eyes just along there, picking that out, and then the top of the cheekbone. So just in there, we've got this line coming down the side of his face that we want to pick out too, because that's standing out nicely. So it's all these sorts of features just help these details stand out a little bit more. And with that, the skin is now painted. Now again, it's going to look a little bit strange at this stage because he does have a moustache, but we'll come back to painting that later on. But you'll notice the eyes are quite dark, and it's a good idea to make sure they are fairly dark at this stage. However, we're not going to paint any of the detail into them for the time being, because what we're going to do is come back to those later on to give them a glowing effect. So at this stage, just make sure you still have a little bit of that wash in there to keep them separate and marked out from the rest of the skin. But now what we're going to do is move on to the next phase of painting the miniature, which is to layer some of the colours we put on there just to clean them up after the wash. And here we're going to start out with that blue armour. So it's back to Kantor blue for this. Now to apply it, I'm actually going to use my size 0 to begin with, but again, feel free to change brush as you need to throughout this phase, because basically we're reapplying this onto the blue armour, but quite specifically this time, looking to avoid the recesses on the panels as we go around. Now because this miniature has a lot of runes built into it, that's why I've gone for this smaller brush, but when you're doing parts that don't have any runes on, feel free to go for a bigger one if you're comfortable with that. But once that paint's thinned and ready, we're just ready to start looking for these panels, and essentially we're looking for the flat areas where we just want to paint it on. Now on the foot here, it's a nice and clear area where we can do this, and what we're looking for is these flat areas in the middle of the panel. And as you get close to the recess where more of that black wash settled, you basically just don't drop into it. So you can see as I get close to the end of the foot there, then skip past that recess and do the sole of it around there. Same with these little parts that are sticking up just around here. Again, we want to pick those up, just being careful not to go into the shadow areas. Now where it gets a little bit more intricate is, as I mentioned, around those runes, which you can see all around the foreleg just here. In this case, again, we're looking for those flat areas. So for example, around here, just making sure we stick to the raised up part and just being really careful not to drop into those recesses so as to retain that definition from the wash. With that blue armour now layered, you can see it's nice and tidy and ready for highlighting later on. But before we do that, what we need to do is layer two more details. And we'll start out with the gold so we can bring that shine back to it. For this, we're going to return to Dragon's Gold. Now, once that's done, we need to do the same thing to the parchment. And here we're going to go back to Griffon Claw. But first of all, what we need is Dragon's Gold. And to apply it, I'm going to be sticking to the same brush here, so my size 0. But again, feel free to change size as you need to. And we're looking to repeat this technique here on all the gold details, which is going to brighten them up and get a nice metallic shine back to them. So you won't need very much of it. As ever, just make sure it's nice and thin and that your brush isn't overloaded, and then we can start looking for these gold features. So for example, we've got this design on top of his armour just here, where we're looking for the flatter areas that aren't in shadow. Just want to apply it thinly to those areas and just carefully avoid those recesses to retain that definition that we got from the wash. With that shine now returned to the gold, we're ready to move on to layering the parchment using some Griffon Claw. And with this, what we need to do is start applying it once again onto the flatter areas whilst carefully avoiding the recesses. So what this means is to apply it in this sort of direction you can see on this parchment, just looking for those darker areas and just skipping past them and carrying on again on the other side. Once you're happy with that layering on the parchment, you're then ready to move on to the next phase of painting the miniature, which is going to be to highlight it. And here what we should do is start out by highlighting the main colour of the miniature, which is of course that blue armour. Now the blue I'm going to use for the first highlight here is going to be Outdoor Guard blue, and to apply this what you need is a really fine brush now. So I'm using my size 00 once again, because with this armour what we need to do is edge highlight it to really bring out the sharpness of the detail on there and bring out all those panels and things and help it stand out. Now the trick to doing this is to get the paint thinned correctly, and essentially what we're trying to do is find a sweet spot where it's quite thin and quite runny, but not so runny that's going to go out of control. And it takes a little bit of practice to get your head around what exactly you're looking for there. But essentially what you do is just add a bit of water into your paint at the side of it there, creating a little puddle here of the paint that's thinned down, and then just add pigment as you need to, and just test to make sure it's really smooth and feels like there's no resistance. Now once you've got that sorted out, you can always test it on your palette by having a go at painting some lines using the tip of your brush. And at this point you can see it's starting to almost dry out quite quickly, so I've definitely not thinned the paint down enough. So I'm just going to add a little bit more water to that, bring that in there like that to make it a little bit thinner and a bit more runny. Then once again we can try painting some lines on the palette, and this time it's going on a bit better. It's a little bit smoother, it's lasting a bit longer, so I'm happy there with that. So with that thin and ready, what we need to do is just get some in the brush, then just twist your bristles on the palette, removing the excess paint. Once you've got that fine tip on there, we're then ready to start applying it. And here we're looking for all the sharp edges and panels and things. So a lot of these you can actually approach using the side of the brush. So for example, this curve going across the shoulder pad here, holding it about 45 degrees from the flat and just skimming along, following it around, and you see this way what you get is nice sharp highlight following the edge really quickly and really easily. Now the great thing about Terminator armour is that you actually get quite a lot of angles that are like this, such as on the shoulder blade. You can see on this one as well, we can easily do this one too. But every now and then you will encounter some panels where you can't quite do this, such as this almost access hatch thing we've got on the top of the armour just here. In this case what we'll need to do is use the tip of the brush and follow that all the way around. So just angle it so you're nice and comfortable, making sure your hands are touching so you're nice and steady, and then with the tip of the brush in a downward motion just follow it all the way around. So we're looking at these lines here, this one along here as well, just steadily building it up, and this one along here, just gently working our way around here like this. Now in this miniature we do have all these runes and things, but you don't actually have to worry about highlighting these at this stage because we're going to bring them out later on with some glowing effects. So don't worry about all these panels here, but if you do have some that are particularly prominent that you want to pick out, then feel free to do so. For example, we've got these rounded ones here on top of the knees just there above that skull. So if you want to get that one you can do, but don't worry about following it all the way, just get the bit where the light would catch, such as along here. And with that, we've now got a nice highlight on that blue armour, helping the details stand out a bit more. And you can leave it here if you want to, but as this is a character, what we're going to do is just take it a little bit further. And if you decide you want to do the same, what you now need is a lighter blue colour. So we picked out some Fenrisium Grey here. Now to apply it, we're going for the same sort of method, but just more delicately approaching it, just catching the sharpest areas to help them pop a little bit more. So when you get this ready, you won't need that much of it. I'm still using my size 00 brush for it, and you can see that paint is much lighter colour now on the palette. What I'm going to do is thin it down with the water so it's a little bit translucent. So gradually bringing the water in there until we can see that palette showing through. Then what we need to do is make sure we only have a small amount on the brush here. You can see it looks like there's hardly any on there really. And then with this, we're now looking for those sharper corners. So, for example, on the back of the armour just here, you can see these sharp angles we've got in the backpack, well, backpack area just around here. What we want to do is just focus on those corners and just flick this colour on those areas. So just very lightly skimming it on, so you can see it gets lighter on that edge and helps it pop out a little bit more. So really now it's a matter of just looking around the miniature for any features like this that stand out more. So for example, the top of the shoulder plates just here, we can skim it across areas like that. We've got the corners on the front of the shoulder plates too, so around here we can get these little areas. So basically anything like this. With that fine highlight now applied, all the blue of his Terminator armour is now completed, and so we can move on to highlighting the other colours that appear on there. And we'll start out with the black, and for this what we need to do is highlight with a dark grey. So we need some Dungeonstone Grey here. Now once that's done, we can then take it further with a lighter grey, and here we're going to use some Carcharodon Grey, and at the same time we can also use this to highlight the Crux Terminatus. Now once that's done, we'll then need some Evilson Scarlet for the red details, and then we'll move on to some Wasteland Brown, and this will be to highlight that leather. But first of all, what we need is Dungeonstone Grey, and to apply it I recommend sticking to the small brush once again, so I'm still using my size 00 here, and with it what we need to do is make sure it's nicely thinned down, just like when we were highlighting that blue. So once you've got that prepared, we can start looking for the black features, and to begin with, we've got the casing of his Stormbolter here on the back of his arm. This is going to be edge highlighting just like we did with the armour, so we're looking for the sharper corners. We want to gently work our way around, picking all those out to get some nice definition to this feature. Now also we've got the black details that are the joints in the armour, and these are a bit tricky to get to, so you can see there's some ridges just on the underside here. All we need to do is just flick the brush in the parts that stand out, so just a little bit here just to bring out some of that texture. With that first highlight finished, we're then ready to move on to some Carcharodon Grey, and this is going to first of all be a fine highlight on the black details. So just like when we did the fine highlight on the blue earlier on, we're looking for sharper features that stand out, and you just want to flick a little bit of this colour on those parts just to help them pop that tiny bit more. Now in addition, we can use this colour to highlight the Crux Terminatus around here, and when approaching this, go at it like the blue armour. So again, we're looking for all those edges, and we just want to carefully follow around, where possible using inside the brush, but otherwise it's the tip of it, just to make sure this detail stands out too. Next up we need some Evil Sunz Scarlet, and first of all this is going to be for those red pipes, and here we need to look for where the light catches them. So for example on this one it's along the top here, and we just want to paint a line following that highlight there just to emphasise it a bit more. So we're looking at areas such as just here to help that pop out. Now in addition we've got the red grip of the axe, and here we're looking to pick out the texture, so this is going to be like doing the armour once again. We're looking for those edges, we just want to follow along each one. And finally, we can move on to some Wasteland Brown, and this is going to be to highlight the leather first of all. So for example, the satchel that we've got just here, and whilst this is another one of these edge highlights, what we can do is be just a little bit rough with this one, and this gives the impression of some slightly more aged leather. So you can see as I'm doing this, I'm using the side of the brush, but I'm more dotting it along so we get that rough texture, and every now and then you can just bring it a little bit onto the flat areas, put some cracks on them, so areas such as along there. Now in addition with this colour, what we can do is use it to base coat the moustache, and as you're doing this, just really make sure you brace your hand and take your time to pick it out. And there we are, with that those features are highlighted, and also we've got that moustache picked out, and we'll add a highlight to the moustache later on, but first what we now need to do is highlight the metallics, and for this we'll start out with the gold. Here I'm going to use some glistening gold, then we can move on to the silver, and here I'm going to use some mithril blade. But first of all we need that glistening gold, and to apply it it's going to be the same sort of process once again, so still use your small brush. I'm going for my size 00 once more. And with the gold details, we're now looking for those sharper edges where we're really going to make that shine pop out. So, for example, we've got this design in the middle of the chest just here. We're looking for the edges of it, and we just want to skim our brush around them just to help them pop out and give it that really nice shine. With the gold complete, we can now move on to highlighting the silver details, and here I'm going to be using some mithril blade applied in the same way, so looking for those sharp edges once again. Now this does bring us to the axe, and in our case we've just got these small silver details on the axe, but remember if you decide to paint the blade silver, then be sure to highlight that too at this point. And with that, the metallics are now done, so it's time to move on to highlighting some smaller features here, and we'll start out with that Purity Seal wax, and here what we'll need is some glistening gums, so a nice sort of pinkish colour, and then we're going to move on to using some Vampire Fang, so a light bone colour, and this is going to be for numerous details, and once that's done, what we can then do is use a dark brown, so here's going to be some cuirass leather. This is going to be to add some text onto the parchment. But first of all, what we need is that glistening gums, and for this I'm still using my small brush, so still the size 00, and here we just need to pick out some of the texture of the wax on those seals. So make sure it's nicely thinned down and a little bit translucent on your palette. So there we go, about that kind of consistency there. And then we just need a small amount, and we're looking for the wax seals here. What we need to do is start by going around the outer edge in a sort of dotting motion like this to make it look a little bit lumpy almost, to give the impression of that lobbed wax on there. Then we can also just pick out a little bit in the middle. Once you've highlighted those seals, we can then move on to some Vampire Fang, and there's a few things to do here, starting out with those yellow cables, and for this we just need to approach each one at this sort of angle and just skim along them so we pick out that raised texture of those ridges, so very gently following them along here like this. Now in addition with this colour, what we can do is highlight all the parchment now, so we're looking at parchment around here for example. What to do is pick out the edges of it, so following it all the way around, and also look for sharper creases and just go across those two to lift them out a little bit there like that as well. Now in addition we can use it as a fine highlight highlight on the crux terminatus for the stone effect here. We're just looking for sharper features such as around the eye holes of the skulls here, and just add a tiny bit of this like this, just to shift that tone ever so slightly and just make it look a little bit more like stone. So there we go. And then finally we can also use it as a highlight on the moustache, and here all we need to do, just dot along just to pick out some of the texture. And then finally we need a dark brown to pick out the text on the parchment. So here I'm using some cuirass leather, and all you need to do is just run a few squiggles just running along the paper. So just work your way down, just squiggle it on like this, just to give the impression of text. Once you've finished applying text to all of the parchment, the miniature is then just about fully highlighted, and we can move on to some smaller details. And one of them might be a smaller detail, but it is nonetheless a very important one, because now it's time to paint in the chapter colours on the shoulder pad. And we're looking at the right shoulder pad here in the circle that's sculpted onto it. Now the colours you choose here will vary depending on what chapter you're doing, and you should certainly pick the appropriate ones for it. So for example, if you're doing Blood Angels, you want to go for reds. If you're doing Dark Angels, you're looking at the Deathwing colours. In our example though, as we mentioned, we're going for Imperial Fists, so what we're going to do is build up the yellow like we did with those yellow pipes. So to start out with, we're going to use some Dark Sun Yellow, and then over the top we can layer some Skulker Yellow, and for the highlight we're going to use some Phalanx Yellow. But to begin with, what we need is that Dark Sun Yellow, and to apply this I've gone back to my size 0 brush for this base coat, and what we want to do is just neatly apply this on as smoothly as possible. So if you're doing yellow like us, go into this expecting having to apply it as a few thin coats just to make sure it's built up, and really what we're looking at is this circle on the shoulder right here. And when you're doing this, you just need to be careful not to drop into the recess where it actually meets the blue armour. So for example, once I've got some on here, you can see as I get close to the edge, I just need to be really careful making sure not to drop into that recess. But if you do, don't worry about it, just grab some black wash and just run it into the recess just to neaten it up before you continue. The base coat's done, so now it's time to layer over the top with some Skulker Yellow to make the yellow much brighter. And the process here is exactly the same with the original base coat colour, just thinly applying it, building it up to keep it nice and smooth. And then finally it's time to switch down to your smallest brush. So here I'm using my size 00, and with some Phalanx Yellow what we need to do is edge highlight around this circle. So we're looking for this line here just next to this ridge, and just want to carefully follow it all the way around. And with that, we've now finished painting in that round part for the chapter badge. And remember, no matter what chapter you've gone for, once you've done that, just later on, all you'll need to do is apply the transfer for your chapter on top. But now what we're going to do is move on to a fun detail, because now it's time to paint the blade of the force axe. Now, if you've already painted it silver, you won't need to do this, but here we're going to go for a sort of a shimmering energy effect. And to do it, the first thing that we need to do is base coat it with a good colour to get things going. In this case, we're going to use some Stegadon Scale Green, which is a lovely colour for this sort of thing. And to apply it, I've chosen my size 0 brush. Now, I do recommend going for a medium to small to a small brush for this one, because whilst base coating this in, there's that gold design on the side of the axe that we just need to work around whilst doing it. So that's why we want to go for a brush of about this size. And once you've got that paint thin down, it's time to start looking for the blade, and you can see what I mean with the gold design on here. What we need to do is just start base coating around it. So we're looking at this sort of region just here, just thinly applied onto the flat areas. And as you get to that design, just allow your brush just to work up to them. So for example, in this part, you can poke it in, just allowing the raised relief of that design to stop the bristles from falling too far. And this way you can get a nice neat base coat of this colour. Once the base coat's done, the next thing that we're going to do is apply a black wash over the blade here, and the main purpose for it is to get some distinction between the blade and that gold detail, so there's a nice bit of shading between the two. So what we want here is a black wash, and I'm going to use some Oblivion black wash for it, and to apply it I'm going to use my small brush here. I've got my size 00, and that's just because we need to keep it under control on the blade only and not on that gold. Now you could paint into the recesses if you want to, but for this I prefer to paint it all over it to get a bit more depth on the blade there, and also to make sure it dries smoothly too. So it's going to be just a nice movement like this, just making sure to coat it, just making sure it settles into those corners where we meet that gold detail around there. The black wash is now completely dry, so it's time to start moving on to building up that effect. And to do this, first of all, we need to return to that original colour that we base coated the blade with, so it's back to some Stegadon Scale Green. And to apply it, I'm now going to use my size 00 because we want a bit more accuracy about where it goes this time. Now, as before, we just need to make sure it's nice and smooth on the palette, and then you're ready to start applying it. And this time, we're looking to paint it onto the flat parts of the blade, but we want to avoid getting it into the corner where it meets that gold. So for example, I'm going to go down the cutting edge just along here to just brighten that colour up a little bit. You can see as I get close to where that gold is, I'm just going to go close to it but not directly into that corner, so as to retain the definition between the two areas. Now that's done, we're ready to start going lighter, and for this we're now going to move into some Sotek green, and what we want to do is start thinly laying this onto the blade so that it starts to brighten up in specific areas whilst leaving other parts dark. Now what I recommend you do at this stage is make sure you've got some picture reference from the one in the box and use that as your guide here. And if you look at it closely, what you'll tend to see is on the different surfaces you'll get a sort of crossover between the parts that are light and dark. So for example on the cutting edge you'll tend to get light to dark, and on the flat of the blade it'll be the opposite way around of dark to light, but you'll see that develop as we go along. But what we need to do is get this set up, and I recommend using a small brush once again, so I'm still using my size 00. And what we want to do here is just harness the translucency of this paint so that we can apply it as a few thin coats to build up the colour to get that gradient. So what we want to do on the palette is thin it down with water to make it quite thin, bring it right down to about this point here, you see. And with this, what we can do is start looking for the areas where we need the colour to be. So if we look at the cutting edge along here, as I mentioned, what we get is a bit of a gradient. It tends to be dark in the middle, then gets lighter on either end. And for this first coat, what we want to do is just start laying in the areas that are all going to be generally lighter. And you can see with this colour, it's quite thin, which means it blends nicely into the one beneath it. So we're looking towards the bottom just there, and then we want to go towards the top on this side. So we're looking around this region just here. And it's this smooth motion applying it, which you can see puts on very thinly, meaning it dries very quickly. Then we can go in for a second coat and we just push a little bit further down towards the end and do another coat on top. The colour will start to get stronger and build up that gradient that we're looking for there. And the same is going to be true on the top of it, where we're looking to go a little bit further up here. So they're like that. Then we've got that flip over and how the two colours almost contrast as we get to different surfaces, where in the actual flat of the blade, it's going to be lighter in the middle instead. So it's the same process, just thinly applying it, but this time it's in this region here, and you can see how having the small brush really helps. So we'll take it a little bit onto the flat of the blade just down there as well. Again, we'll just put it on thinly so that it dries relatively quickly, and then we can go in for that second coat to make it stronger, which again is just going to be focused a bit more towards the middle. So here you can see that crossover starting to build up, where it goes light there, then light there, and then light there. Same is going to be true on the spike on the reverse of the axe, where it's going to be lighter towards the tip of it. So in this case, we're looking at layering in this region just here, again thinly to build up those few coats of it. Then when we get to the flat of it on the back, it's going to be the opposite way around, where the lighter colour needs to be a little bit closer to the base around here. I've finished building up that Sotek green now, and you can see by doing it as thin coats there, we've got a nice gradient going on those colours just there. And so now we can take it a little bit lighter. And what we're going to do here is a mix using Sotek green again, but this time introducing some Fenrisian grey to it. So we need to create this on the palette first of all. So again, using that small brush, what we want to do is just get both these colours. And what I'm going to do is just get a bit more Sotek green on here that we can draw from. And then it's time to get the Fenrisian grey next to it on the palette. So just a little bit of this. Pop it down around there, just a bit more I think, there we go, and then we can start bringing them together in the middle. And so what we want to do is create a lighter tone that's in the region of something like this. It doesn't have to be exact, but just something like this is absolutely fine. The next thing then to do is to thin it right down so it's very, very translucent, so quite a bit of water mixed in there like that. Now I'm also going to make a slightly lighter version of this, just going a bit to the left of it just there, just bringing in a little bit more Fenrisian grey so we've got a slightly lighter tone. So this way you can see we've got a little bit of variety to choose from, but we want to start with this one around here. So first of all, make sure the brush is clean, make sure it's damp, just get a little bit of this. Then we're going to start thinly applying this onto the areas where we want the blade now to be even lighter. So if we look at the cutting edge around here, remember we've got that back and forth going on, so concentrate around here first of all. We're looking towards the areas that are lighter, where we just want to thinly apply it in that region. So just there, we also want to thinly apply it into the part towards the top where it's going to get lighter just there. And there we go. So what we do is get it on there, then go for the lighter colour and then glaze that a little bit further down. So in this case, it's going to be a little bit further down there and a little bit further down here. Now you can see we've got a little bit of a jump happening with the transitions of the colours just there. So to bring that together, what we're then going to do is just go back to that previous one, just making sure it's really nice and thin there on the palette, and just bring it over all of them. So really smooth, really thin, just apply it over the top just to ease them all together. So just there like that, and then just here like that. And you can see this way we'll get that nice gradient between all the colours. So this stage is basically going to be this on all the areas of the axe, just taking your time, remembering that back and forth that we get. So we just want to start to lighten it up a little bit in this region just here, and just thinly applying it and steadily building it up. Once you've finished building up that colour, we're then ready to do some sharper highlights to finish the blade off, and for this we'll start out with Fenrisian Grey on its own this time. Then after that we need a pure white, so here I'm going to use some White Star. But first of all we need Fenrisian Grey, and to apply it stick to your small brush, so I'm still going using my size 00 here, and this time we just need a small amount of this, and basically what we're going to be doing is edge highlighting with it on all the sharp edges of the axe, so not just the cutting edge but every angle that we got on there. So what we need to do is make sure it's thinned down and ready, and then what we can do is start applying it to these edges, and for the most part we can just use the side of the brush and skim our way around. So we're looking at areas such as here, we just want to follow these edges all the way around, just making sure we always turn the miniature so that we're comfortable, so we can get that sharp line following all of these angles. Now as we get to the cutting edge, there is the outer edge of it where we want to swoop all the way along this outer edge just here, steadily building that up so we get that stronger colour. But there is that angled part on the inside, and here you'll need to use the tip of the brush. This is the area to make sure you're really nice and steady because we want this line to be as fine as possible. So just bring it all the way down this area, just here, taking it all the way up to the top of the axe, there, like that. Now with this colour I do recommend applying it as 2 coats to make sure you build it up. But you can see by making it translucent it fades into the colour beneath, so again continues to build that gradient. So as we go back in with that second coat, you can see now we start to get that sharper colour coming through, and it also means we can bring it just a little bit onto the flat, just there like that, for that very lightest part on that part of the blade. And then finally we can move on to a pure white for the final highlight. So here I'm using some White Star and I thin it down with a bit of water so it's nice and translucent, and the first coat is just to apply it all the way around these sharper edges so we get that really bright highlights going around areas like that. Now once you've made a pass following all these edges, then it's time to do a second coat, and in this case what we're looking for are where the lines intersect with each other, and in this case just do a dot on them to make it even brighter in those areas. So for example just there and just here. And with that highlight now applied, you can see the blade of the Force axe is now complete, and so we're going to move on to the final detail, which is all those blue glows that are scattered around the miniature. And there's a few different ones to do here, but they use the same sort of colours so we can go through them all at the same time. And to do it, what we need to do is start out with some Thousand Suns blue. Now to apply this, you definitely want to go for your smallest brush, so I'm using my size 00 once again, and what we need to do is first of all start looking to some of these glows where essentially we base coat them in. Now once that's done, we're then going to move on to those runes. In this case it's going to be a little bit more running in a slightly more inky sort of consistency for the paint, so that's why we're separating the two. But first of all we'll go with the regular base coating ones, for which we just want to make sure the paint's thinned down in the usual way, and then it's time to start looking for these features. Now here first of all we're looking for the orbs that appear around the armour. So if we look at the psychic hood, you can see there are 3 on top here. But for this first step all we've got to do is block these in. So just a standard base coat, just making sure you neatly apply this on those areas to make sure they're all coloured in. So on this one as well, for example, just make sure we block it in entirely at this stage. Then we've also got his eyes to paint. Now for this you will of course need to make sure that your hands are really steady, and basically you just gently move in to introduce this blue into the dark area of the eyes. So we're looking at around here, we just want to run this colour into that area just there. Same is going to be true on the other eye, which is a little bit harder to get to, but it's the same process where again we just look for that recess and just drop it into that area there like that. Now we've also got the blue that appears on his hand, and in this case what we need to do is effectively base coat it towards the end just here. Now you might be wondering then why we painted all the ridges and joints here, but that's just because this is going to show through subtly as we go forward. So we want it there also because some of this is going to show through as we get further back down the hand. So we want to make sure it naturally just progresses into this glow here. But for this first step, it's basically this region here and then on the inside of all the fingers and the thumb. So we're looking at this region just here. Now once all that's done, what we can then do is turn our attention to the runes, and for this what we need to do is set the paint up a little bit differently, but that slightly more inky consistency I mentioned earlier. So it's just a matter of running a bit more water into it to make it a little bit thinner like this. And because it's diluted, expect to have to do 2 coats of this, but it is important that it's like this because we need to avoid building up any sort of clumpy appearance of the paint in these areas for the effect to work. So that's why it has to be thinned down like this. And once you've got it like that, it's a matter of looking for these recesses and basically just painting it into them, allowing the paint to catch either side. So if we look at the foreleg just here, looking at running it into areas like this and just allowing the colour to catch either side of that recess so that colour starts to stain in the surrounding area to build that effect of the glowing light. So all the way around like that. Just taking our time, just using the tip of the brush, just running it in there. Now you can also bring it a bit further out if you want to make the glow a little bit stronger, in which case again make sure the paint's nice and thin, and then just bring it out a little distance on either side of all these runes. So onto the flat armour such as around here, just staining it ever so slightly, just building it up again with those 2 coats, just like we'd be doing with the recessed parts, just to build up the colour in a controlled fashion there like that. Now you can also use this on the other parts where we've got the blue glows if you want to have a bit of a glow around those, such as on these orbs, where again, just use this thin version of the paint and just introduce it onto the blue armour surrounding these areas. I've finished applying that initial blue on there now, and you can see it starting to appear in all those runes and things, and we've also got a subtle glow appearing around them, and so now what we can do is push it further. So we need to go to a lighter bluish green colour, and here I'm going to use some Araman blue. Now once again, go for your small brush to apply it, because it's largely the same sort of technique that we're doing here, only just a little bit more selective as to where exactly we apply the paint. And again, what we'll do is start out with the areas that are larger, like the orbs and things like that, where we just want to layer them. So make sure that paint's thinned down for that purpose. And then we're looking for these parts, and now it's a matter of applying it a little bit more towards the middle of them. So this one on his head, just here on top of the psychic hood, was focusing this colour a little bit more towards the middle, so it gets brighter the further up we go. Same on this one, where we're looking at this sort of region just here. Now on the other areas, such as the hand, what we're now starting to do is pick out the raised detail. So in the case of all the ridges on the hand, it's a matter of just looking for those parts that stand out and following those, so layering it essentially, such as these ridges just here. And when it comes to the fingers, we're again looking for the flatter areas where we just want to apply it onto those flat regions, so just there, for example. Now we've also got the eyes to do here, and this is again a matter of just really steadying your hands and carefully moving in, and now we're looking for a bit more blue just towards the middle of them so they get brighter in the middle, so we're looking at around there. Now once all that's done, we then got to move on to painting those runes once again, and here is that two-stage process where now we're looking for a thinner version of the paint. So we just need to add a bit more water to it to make it a bit more inky. And then it's a process now of introducing it into those runes, into the deeper areas preferably. You'll probably catch some of the edges as you go along, but it's okay because it will fade into the surrounding colour. But the key thing is to make sure you get the colour mostly strong in the recessed part. So again, if we look at this foreleg just here, it's just a matter of looking for that recess and running it into it. So along here, for example, so the blue becomes a little bit stronger and more intense. With that done, you can see we really made good progress with the blue, making it lighter, and so now it's time to take it even further. So what we're now going to need is some Baharoth blue, and once that's done, we'll then need some white star, which is just going to be for the orbs and things, but we'll come to that in a little bit. Because first of all, what we need is the Baharoth blue. Now for this, what I'm going to go for is that small brush once again, because now what we're looking for on the raised up parts, the bits that we've been layering essentially, we just want to go towards the very tops of those parts, help them pop out a little bit more. Meanwhile, for those runes, again, we're going to be running it into the recessed parts, but we'll start out with the areas where effectively layering and almost highlighting really, starting out with the orbs and things, in which case it's a matter of thinly applying this paint a little bit further up. So on these ones, for example, we're now looking at going in this region just here for that brightest part of the blue starting to come forward there like that. Same on this one, where again we're looking more towards the top of it, so we want to go around there. Then we've got his eye, for which we just want to paint a dot in now. So again, really brace your hands, gently move in and just painting that bright bit right in the middle of his eyes right there. When it comes to his hand, what we now need to do is be highlighting this. So it's a matter of picking out the raised parts of the ridges that we've got on the joint of the armour. So we're looking at areas such as along here, just carefully building that colour up. And on the actual fingers, it's now basically an edge highlight as if we were highlighting the armour. So we're looking for the edges and corners and things. So we want to gently follow along each one. Now once done all those areas, what we need to do is turn our attention to all these runes. And so for this, once again, what we need to do is thin the paint down so it's a little bit inky. So just add that water in to make it quite runny. So bring it down to about this point here. Don't need very much now, and now it's time to be as accurate as possible, just introducing this into the deepest part of each rune. So make sure you're nice and steady, carefully approach them, and just run the colour directly into that deepest corner so you get that nice bright blue coming forward from the deepest parts of the armour. And then finally, we can move on to some white star. Now this is not going to be for the runes at all. Don't worry about those for the time being. Instead, just focus on the parts that we were more layering and highlighting in the usual way. So for example, the orbs, we just want to get that white bit at the very top of them. So it's the brightest area just there. And things such as the hand, it's going to be a very fine highlight here. So we just want to very carefully pick out some of the sharpest corners and edges, just to help finish this detail off. And with that, the glows are nearly finished, and if you want to, you could then apply some white into those runes by just thinning down some of that white star, running it in there in the same sort of way that we've been doing. However, what we're going to do here is something a little bit different, and instead we're going to apply that white final highlight in the runes by doing an oil pin wash. Now, if you're going to do this, the first thing that you need to do is protect the paint that we got on there already. So now I'm going to go outside and spray it with a varnish. What I'm going to use is this. This is Tamiya Flat Clear. I'm going to spray it. When we come back, we'll do the pin wash. The varnish is now completely dry, so it's time to apply that oil pin wash. And to do this, we're going to be using some oil paint. So there are a few things that we need to get together to do this. The first thing is going to be a dimple tray, and that's what I've got just here. And it's an aluminium one, just so you can clearly see what we're doing. So the colour stands out because we are going for white here. Speaking of white, what we need is a white oil paint. So that's what I've got just here. This is titanium white. It's a Winsor Newton paint, this one. And then what we need to do is thin it down with some oil paint thinners. For that, what I've got is some just here from the great man himself, some odorless thinner. So designed for oil paints, ideal for our purposes just here. Next, what we need is a way of getting the thinners onto the actual palette here. So what I've got is a pipette, and that's this just here. Going to be using this to move the paint, well, the thinners around. So what we need to do is first of all get some of that paint onto the palette. So what we're going to do is just get a little bit of this white and just pop it into the middle of one of these dimples just here. So just a little amount of the paint there like that. So then what we need to do is put some of those thinners on top of it. So that's what we're going to be using the pipette. So first thing to do, open up the bottle. And then we're just going to get some of this. So just get that in there and then start putting it into our little dimple on the tray here. And what we want to thin it down is so that it's fairly weak, but not too weak. So it's a bit of a balancing act, and a bit of practice will get the hang of this. But what we're looking for is to put roughly that much there on there like that. And then we can start mixing it together. So I'm using an old brush for this. This is an old regiment brush from the Army Painter. Just want to mix that in thoroughly so the paint really gets around there so we get that white wash almost there like that. So really make sure we work that paint in there because some of it can stick to the brush. So really make sure you poke it in there, work it around until we get that thin white there, like that. So with that prepared, we then need to apply it. And because we're putting on only small amounts into some quite deep recesses, what we want is a fine brush for this. So I've got an old size 00 here. What we want to do is just get some of this, and we can see how strong it is on the side of the palette just there like that. And that's all right. I think that's good for what our purposes are just here. And what we want to do then is just make sure we don't have loads on here so it doesn't go out of control. So using that dimple tray, just going to remove excess until there's only a small amount left on here, and then we can start applying it. And what we want to do is look for the deeper recesses and just dot it into some of them. So for example, on the foreleg just here in this region, what I'm going to do is just dot it on there and just let that paint pull into the recess and get that bright white in the deepest area there like that. And so it's just a matter of just looking for these deeper areas and just dotting it in like this. Now, once you're happy with this, it's then time to move on to basing the miniature. And I recommend you give this plenty of time to dry, so give it 2 or 3 hours, and then it's time to put the basing method on that you want to go for. And as ever, it's entirely your choice what scheme you go for here, but in this case, I'm going to go for a desert base. And here we have our completed Terminator Librarian, ready to go forth and smite the enemies of the Emperor. So as you've seen when painting this model, by and large it's fairly straightforward and you're painting in all the armour and the details, but where it really comes to life is where you put in those psychic effects with all the glows and things. Now when you're doing these, remember just to really take your time and be as neat as you can, in particular when you're painting that bluish colour into the recessed parts of the runes, so be really careful here, and if like us you do that oil effect, remember just dot it on very carefully so as it doesn't overwhelm it. But have fun painting your librarian, and we'll see you again very soon.